So I'd like to present this proclamation right now to Joe. Whereas the grateful people of Santa Fe and New Mexico and beyond have turned to Joe Hayes for learning and inspiration, and whereas by telling stories, Joe Hayes conveys ethics, morals, and good manners from generations of our grandparents and makes us better people. And whereas since 1979, Joe Hayes has told us stories so we could learn them. And whereas associations of publishers have recognized Joe Hayes more than 15 times for his bilingual books for children and their adults, and whereas Joe Hayes dedicated one of his books, The Coyote Under the Table, to all the parents and grandparents who carried these stories in their memories across oceans and continents and passed them along to new generations, and to the scholars who saved them from being forgotten in this modern age, and finally, to all who breathe new life into old stories by sharing them, the principal one of whom, Joe Hayes, we this day honor and thank. And whereas Joe Hayes has been the resident storyteller for children and their adults at the Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian since 1982, and whereas August 8, 2021 marks the final storytelling event at the Wheelwright Museum for Joe Hayes prior to his rumored retirement, now therefore I, Alan M. Weber, Mayor of the City of Santa Fe, New Mexico, do hereby proclaim Sunday, August 8, 2021 as Joe Hayes Day. Standing ovation, everybody. Standing ovation. Come on.
Oh, that's too much. Thank you.
I'll put that over there for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Now let's get to Joe Hayes.
Oh, boy. It is hard to tell stories when you're crying, you know. Yeah, why the tears are in my eyes. Thank you. That was so kind. Oh, thanks to everybody for turning out to listen to the stories tonight and for all the years I've been able to share them. Thanks to all the people who helped me along on the way. From when I first got this idea in my mind, maybe I could tell stories all the time. And they encouraged me, and they gave me a leg up here and there, and I've been able to do it for all of these years. That, in my mind, has been a real miracle for me. And tonight is a miracle to see so many of you out here ready to listen to some stories. I know a lot of you are aware that I used to live in Arizona when I was a kid. There's one of my favorite stories that I learned from way back there in Arizona. I have been telling it for such a long, long, long time that my kids remembered as just about the first story they ever heard from me. And it is an in the beginning story, so it's an appropriate one to start the evening with. It all happened way, way back at the beginning of time. And they say that the sky god made all the animals of the desert from the sand and the clay of the desert. When he finished his work, he gathered all the animals together in one place. He said that each animal could ask for a way to protect itself, and it would receive that. Well, the mountain lion said, "Give me sharp claws and teeth." And the mountain lion has sharp claws and teeth. The skunk said, "Just make me smell terrible. Then leave me alone." The skunk smells terrible. The jackrabbit wanted long legs to run fast and get away. Coyote wanted to be clever so he could trick the other animals. I don't think I have to tell you what the porcupine wanted. Quills all over its body. But there was one animal. This was a very gentle snake. And the snake said, I'm only worried that someone might step on me. I go on my belly on the ground. Can you give me a way to warn other animals, and then they won't step on me? And the sky god put something on the end of the snake's tail. A rattle. And then the snake could shake its tail and make a noise, and other animals would know it was around. But it didn't take the other animals long to realize that even though the snake could make a noise with its tail, it was harmless. It couldn't hurt them in any way. In fact, that snake was so gentle, they started calling it Soft Child. And they would pick on the snake just to make it rattle its tail. Jack Rabbit and Skunk were the worst ones. Skunk would throw it up into the air. Jack Rabbit would wait until it came down and then kick it back up into the air again. And they would just laugh when it rattled its tail. But one day, there was a big ceremonial. All the animals had gathered together to spend the whole day dancing and singing. That day, Jack Rabbit and Skunk were especially cruel to Soft Child. Over and over again, they threw Soft Child into the air and kicked him. But the sky god was looking down at the dances. He saw what was happening. That night, he came down and talked to Soft Child. He said, let's go walking in the desert. I'll give you something. They walked along until they came to a devil's claw plant. In case you don't know that plant, it looks like a vine that grows in the desert, kind of looks like a gourd plant. The fruit, the seed pod, looks like a long, skinny green chili, except that it curves around at the end and almost makes a circle. And in the fall of the year, when the plant dries up, that seed pod turns hard and woody, and the ends spring apart, and there are two sharp, curved points on the end of it. The sky god said to Soft Child, open your mouth. He broke those two sharp, curved points from the devil's claw, and he placed them in the top of the snake's mouth. He touched each one with a tiny bolt of lightning. He said, now you will have two fangs you can bite with. Your bite will be the most deadly of all. But you must promise me you'll always rattle with your tail to give a warning before you bite. And Soft Child gave his promise. The very next day, Soft Child was moving along through the desert, minding his own business. Jack Rabbit happened to see him. Jack Rabbit said to Skunk, come on,
Let's go tease Softchild some more. Skunk said, we teased him a lot yesterday. Let's leave him alone. But Jack Rabbit wouldn't be happy until he picked on Softchild. He ran over there and he kicked him a couple times. The snake started to rattle with his tail. Jack Rabbit laughed when he heard that. He threw him into the air and he let him land hard on the dirt. Softchild rattled louder, but Jack Rabbit just laughed louder. He threw him up again and again. But when he threw him into the air the fourth time, Softchild wouldn't take it anymore. He turned on the jackrabbit and he bit him with his new fangs. All the other animals were surprised when they saw that. The snake had never bitten before. And then they saw Jack Rabbit fall to the ground and quiver and shake all over, and then lie there, still and dead. And then all the other animals said, "Oh, stay away from Softchild. He has deadly fangs he'll bite you with." And that's why it is, from that day to this, all the other animals have been afraid of the rattlesnake. But the truth is, the rattlesnake uses his fangs to protect himself. When he can, he will rattle with his tail to give a warning before he bites. Still, there are people who will say to you, you should kill a rattlesnake whenever you see one. Not the people who tell this story. They say, no, everything has its place out there in the desert. Just stay away from Softchild. He won't bother you if you don't bother him. And those people have lived with all the animals of the desert for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think they know what they're talking about. I know one thing anyhow. Those people don't get bitten by rattlesnakes. Oh, thank you. I told that story to my kids for many years, and then I wished that that story had been told to me more when I was a kid, because when we were kids in Arizona, we didn't really understand about rattlesnakes. Sometimes stories came up about them that made us think they were kind of mean and they wanted to bite you. I guess that's why I ended up telling quite a few stories about rattlesnakes. The one I just told you, maybe it never happened, but it's a true story. The next one I'm going to tell you, you might have a bit of trouble believing. It's about me when I was a kid. What I need to tell you about myself when I was a kid was that I loved to chew bubble gum. I meet a lot of kids today who still like to chew bubble gum. But most of the kids I meet, you know what they do? They take a piece of bubble gum and they unwrap it, they stick it in their mouth, and they chew that piece of bubble gum. That's not what I would do. I would put 2 or 3 pieces of bubble gum in my mouth at the same time. I might even put 5 or 6 pieces of bubble gum all in my mouth at once. And I would be chomping away on a big juicy wad of bubble gum all the time. even when I was in school. My teacher would see that. My teacher would look at me and say, "Get rid of that gum." And I had to take the gum out of my mouth and wrap it in paper and throw it in the wastebasket. I always acted like I was really mad. I didn't really care. I always had another package of bubble gum right here in my shirt pocket. But my mother was the one who would really get mad because I would forget to take the bubble gum out of my pocket. I would throw my shirt with all the other dirty clothes. My mother would wash my shirt. Now, you can probably tell by looking at me that I grew up quite a while ago. I grew up so long ago that my mother had one of those old-fashioned wringer washing machines. Most kids have never even seen a wringer before, unless maybe they went to a car wash. Because you can still see one sometimes at a car wash over by the sink. It has two rollers. There's a crank on the side and you crank it around. The rollers start to spin. You put the rags in between the rollers and they squeeze the water out. That apparatus is called a wringer because it wrings the water out. W-R-I-N-G, not like ringing a bell. It wrings the water out. My mother's old washing machine had a wringer hooked up to the motor because it didn't spin like they do these days. My mother had to take every piece of clothing and put it through the wringer on the washing machine. The rollers would squeeze the water out. You can imagine what would happen when she put my shirt through the wringer. The rollers would squish the bubble gum right into the cloth. There would be a big gunky stain all around the pocket. My mother would say, "Oh, look at this. You ruined another shirt." But then one day something happened. This changed her mind. She never got mad at me again for keeping bubble gum in my shirt pocket. That's because one day I was wandering around out in the desert. I was chomping on my bubble gum, kind of daydreaming. I wasn't paying any attention to where I was going. And I stepped right on a rattlesnake's tail. Well, the snake couldn't rattle and warn me. I was standing on his tail. The snake didn't worry about giving a warning. He came striking up through the air. He was aiming his fangs right at my heart. And the rattlesnake hit me right here. That's where I had bubble gum in my pocket. And the rattlesnake's fangs stuck in the bubble gum. There I stood with my foot on a rattlesnake's tail and his fangs stuck here in my shirt pocket. He was thrashing all around and whipping up against me. I was so scared I couldn't move. I just stood there looking down into his beady little eyes. And those little eyes were just looking hate right back at me. That snake was moving his jaws up and down. He was trying to get his fangs out of the bubble gum so that he could get back at me and really bite me good. But as the snake was moving his jaws around, trying to get his fangs out of the bubble gum,
the bubble gum started getting softer and softer and softer. And then the next thing I knew, there was a little pink bubble coming out of the rattlesnake's mouth. The bubble kept getting bigger and bigger. It got to be about this size. I got up all my courage. I brought my hand up and pop! I popped that bubble and the snake went flying over backwards. His head hit on a rock and it knocked him out cold. But it did take all my courage. I fainted. I fell out in the other direction. I didn't come home for lunch. My mom came looking for me. My mom found me lying there on the ground. I was fainted out cold, and lying in the other direction, she saw a rattlesnake with bubble gum all over its face. My mom asked me what had happened, and I told my mother the same thing I just told to you. Do you think my mother believed that story? No. Do you think my mother said, "You're going to grow up to be a storyteller, just like your dad"? That's what she would have said. Thank you. Thank you. Well, some of you know already, I do enjoy telling some stories with Spanish in them. One story I like to tell is about some big white birds. In Spanish, these birds are called garzas. In English, they're called herons. We have herons in New Mexico, but they're blue. But the herons in this story are white. And in the story, there's going to be una garza mama. There's a mom, una garza mama. There's also going to be una garza papa. There's a dad, la garza mama y luego la garza papa. The mom and the dad. They worked together and they built a nest. They built a nest at the top of a tall tree. The tree was standing beside a wide open lake. La garza mama laid 3 eggs in the nest. 3 huevos de azul claro. 3 pale blue eggs. They were so happy because they knew they were going to have 3 babies. They were so happy that they started flying in circles around the tree. They started to sing. They sang like this. Ding-a-nga-o, ding-a-nga-o, yo mama ganga-re-re. Does everybody know what that means? Well, don't feel bad. I don't either. I know one thing. That's not English. I know another thing. That's not Spanish. But I also know that's the way the garzas would sing. Ding-a-nga-o, ding-a-nga-o, yo mama ganga-re-re. The mother and the father would take turns sitting on the eggs to keep them warm. When one of them was warming the eggs, the other would fly down to the lake and catch fish for them to eat. And every time they changed places, they would fly in circles around the tree.
they would sing that song. Ding-a-nga-o, ding-a-nga-o, yo mama ganga-re-re. But once when they were flying around the tree and singing, pasó algo muy mal. Something bad happened. A strong wind came blowing from the ocean, and it swept them away, carried them away, took them far from the tree, far from their nest at the top of the tree, far from their 3 pale blue eggs. But then the sun came out and it warmed up the eggs, and the babies kept growing inside. Until one day, the first little garza cracked the shell of her egg. Tlaka! She poked her head outside and looked around. She said, ¿Dónde está mi mamá? Where is my mom? She said. ¿Dónde está mi mamá? And then the second little garza cracked the shell of her egg. Taka! And she poked her head out and looked around and said, ¿Dónde está mi papá? Where is my dad? ¿Dónde está mi papá? And then the third little garza, la garcita más chiquita, the littlest one of all, she broke her egg in half. Tlacalaca! And she said, Vamos a buscarlos. Let's go and find them. Vamos a buscarlos. But the other two said, well, how will we know them, even if we do find them? The littlest one said, listen. She opened up her little beak and she sang. She sang like this. Ding-a-nga-o, ding-a-nga-o, yo mama ganga-re-re. And then the other two little garzas opened their beaks and the same song came out. Ooh, I have an idea. Maybe you could sing the song. Do you think you could do it? Let's try it. See if you can. I'll go really slowly. If you can't think of the words, just flap your wings. Ding-a-nga-o, ding-a-nga-o, yo mama ganga-re-re. The littlest one said, see, that's how we sing. Our mom and dad will sing the same song. So they flew away looking for their mother and father. They hadn't been flying very far when they saw a pretty white bird that was flying in their direction. And they said to one another, that bird is pretty. Our mom is probably pretty. So they flew over to the white bird. They said, Señora, ¿es usted nuestra mamá? Are you our mom? They said. Well, the white bird they saw was la paloma, the dove. Everybody knows that a dove is a very tender-hearted bird. When the white dove saw the 3 little garzas all alone in the world, she didn't even think about it. She said, oh, sí, yo soy su mamá. I am your mom, she said. They were so happy they started flying around laughing. But then the littlest one said, Mamá, ¿tú sabes cantar? "Do you know how to sing, Mom?" And the white dove said, "I love to sing. This is my favorite song." She sang for them. Siamberi, siamberi, bemberi, sio sio. Siamberi, siamberi, bemberi, sio sio. Was that the right word? No. They said, "Oh, no, you're not our mom. She doesn't sing like that. Our mom sings like this." Do you remember the song? Ding-dong-go, ding-dong-go, yo mama ganga-dee-dee. And they flew away again, looking for their mom and their dad. As they were flying along, they happened to look down below them, and there was a dead tree down there. On a branch of the dead tree, they saw a bird. It was a blackbird with white wings and red feathers on its head, and it was banging its beak against the branch of the dead tree. Does that sound like any bird you're familiar with? Of course it was el pájaro carpintero. It was the woodpecker. And they said, "Ooh, he looks like a hard worker. Our dad is probably a hard worker." They flew down and they landed close to the woodpecker. They said, "Señor, ¿es usted nuestro papá? Are you our dad?" The woodpecker was always working. He never took time to have a family. And besides, he wasn't really sure he liked children. But when he saw those three little garzas all alone in the world, he felt a kindness he had never felt before. And he said, "Oh, sí, yo soy su papá. I am your dad." They were going to move into the woodpecker's hole in the old dead tree. But then the littlest one said, "Papá, ¿tú sabes cantar? Do you know how to sing, Dad?" "I already told you, the woodpecker was always working. He never took time to learn how to sing songs or maybe paint pictures or play the guitar. But he didn't want to disappoint his children. He said, 'Oh, I am quite a singer. This is my favorite song.' He banged his beak against the branch of the old dead tree, and he sang, Brrka, 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 brrka." Was that the right song? They said, "Oh, you're not our dad. He doesn't sing like that. Our dad sings like this. Ding-dong-go, ding-dong-go, yo mama ganga-dee-dee." They flew back up into the blue sky. And the next time they looked down, they saw a river down below them. There was a woman washing clothes on the bank of the river. They didn't think their mother would look like that, but they decided they had better ask. They flew down, they landed close to the woman. They said, "Señora, con permiso, ¿es usted nuestra mamá? Are you a mom?" That woman had a whole house full of children. She thought some of her children were teasing her. She didn't even look away from her work. She said, "Oh, you know that I'm your mother." They were going to run over there and help their mother with her work. But the littlest one said, "Mamá, ¿tú sabes cantar?" The woman was getting tired of all this foolishness, but like every good mother, she was very patient. She said, "You know how much I like to sing. When I'm washing the clothes, I sing to myself, Sopoa, sopoa, como yo lava. Sopoa, sopoa, como yo lava." Was that the right song? You're not our mother. She doesn't sing like that. Our mother sings like this. Ding dong go, ding dong go. Yo mamá gangarere. Y se fueron volando. They flew away from there. They met up with a scruffy looking blackbird. It is called el toti. Doesn't sing at all. They saw a beautiful bird in a cage. That bird is called el tomegin, and it sings a beautiful song. It wasn't the right song. They met up with la lechuza, the owl. You probably know how an owl sings, don't you? It wasn't the right song. They were getting so tired. They were feeling so disappointed. They saw a little pond down below them. They thought they would fly down to that pond and get a drink of water, and then fly home to the nest and just hope their mother and father would come and find them. They were drinking some water at the pond, and they saw a very strange creature. I will try to describe it to you. Parecía una piedra. It looked like a rock. Parecía una piedra, pero con una cabeza sacada aquí adelante, una colita puntiaguda sacada ahí atrás, cuatro patas sacadas al lado, caminaba despacito. It had a little head poked out at the front. It had a pointy tail poked out at the back. It had four legs poked out to the sides. It walked very slowly. It was a tricky little turtle. It was La Jicotea. It was a tricky little turtle. And they thought, ooh, our mom couldn't possibly look like that. But then they decided, well, we really need to ask everybody. They said, Señora, ¿acaso es usted nuestra mamá? That turtle never passed up a chance to fool anyone. She said, "You better believe I'm your mother. You come home with me right now." They were going to go home with the turtle, but then the littlest one cleared her throat. She said, "Mamá, ¿tú sabes cantar? Do you know how to sing, Mom?" The turtle said, "Que si yo sé cantar. You want to know if I can sing? Yo canto, yo bailo, yo puedo tocar todos los instrumentos de la orquesta." You're asking me if I can sing? I can sing, I can dance, I can play every instrument in the band. I just made up a new song. I will sing it for you. Ay, pobrecito Don Pedro, musela, musela. Ay, pobrecito Don Pedro, musela, musela. Me voy pa' la casa, musela. She started dancing around on a log, and then she fell off the log and disappeared under the water. And the three little garzas started flapping their wings to fly home to the nest. But just then, they saw two big, beautiful white birds come flying in their direction. They were more beautiful than they ever imagined their mother and father could be. Those big white birds landed in the pond. They looked to their left, they looked to their right, and then they opened their beaks and they started to sing. And I'm sure you know how they sang. Ding-a-nga-oh, ding-a-nga-oh, your mama ganga-re-re. The little ones went skipping across the water. Papi, mami, papi, mami. Estuvieron un gran rato abrazándose. They all just stood there hugging for a long time. And the mother and father said, "Where have you been? We got back to the nest. The eggs were broken and you were gone. We have been looking everywhere for you." The little ones told their mother and father about all of the adventures they had. And their mother and father were so proud to see what big, strong, beautiful, brave, and smart children they had. And then the littlest one said, Mom and Dad, do you know how we knew that you were our parents? The mother and father said, no. How did you know that? The three little ones opened their beaks. They sang, Ting-anga, oh, Ting-anga, oh, yo mama ganga re re. And then the mother and father opened their beaks and they sang the song. The whole forest rang with that song. Let's see if we can make this whole hilltop ring with that song. Take a deep breath. Ding-anga-oh, ding-anga-oh, yo mama ganga-re-re. That's the story of the three gods. Thank you. One of the things I love about old stories, if you learn the old stories, you begin to realize that we are all one big family. I learned that story from my friend Marta Eskenazi, who's a folklorist in Cuba. But she said the story came from Africa. It crossed the ocean to Haiti, and people told the story in French. And then it crossed a little more water and it came to the island of Cuba. And they started telling the story in Spanish. But you can still recognize the roots of the story because it still has ding-anga-oh, ding-anga-oh, yo mama ganga-re-re. That's like a long loop that crosses the ocean and ties it all together. That's what the old stories do. They show that we're all one big family. We all tell and we all enjoy the same kinds of stories. That's a joy for me to see. When I came to New Mexico way back in the 1970s, I was so thrilled to find out that there were so many good stories around here. I started going to senior citizen centers and asking people if they remembered old stories. Mostly they would say, "Oh, they told a lot of those cuentos when I was young." But I don't really know how to tell them. Most of the time, I really didn't get any stories, just the memories of listening to stories. But there was a little old lady, una viejita, who said she remembered the story of the tres adivinanzas, the three riddles, las tres adivinanzas. And she told me that story. Three riddles. I'll, I'll, I'll say the riddles to you before I even start the story, and then they're going to come back up again as I'm telling the story. Here's the first adivinanza. ¿Cuántas vueltas da un perro antes de acostarse? How many circles does a dog make before it lies down? ¿Cuántas vueltas da un perro antes de acostarse? That was the first one. The second adivinanza, the second riddle is, ¿qué tan hondo es el mar? How deep is the ocean? ¿Qué tan hondo es el mar? And the third riddle is this one. ¿Qué estoy pensando? What am I thinking? ¿Qué estoy pensando? I'm thinking I better tell you the whole story. It's a story about a priest in the church in a little village up in the mountains many, 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 many years ago. He was a very small man. Maybe he stood about this tall. You know how the people like to give everybody a nickname? They just called him Padre Chiquito. They called him Padre because he was the priest, father. Chiquito, he was a little man. They called him Padre Chiquito. And they loved Padre Chiquito for his kindness and his wisdom and for the gift he had of making people feel at peace with themselves. And then there was another small man in that village who was loved by everyone, but for a different reason. He could make people laugh. That man did not have a single hair on his head. They gave him a nickname. He was El Pelón, the bald-headed one. They called him Pelón. And that bald head was full of jokes and stories and little poems and songs, pero más que nada adivinanzas. More than anything else, that man knew riddles. He could come up with a riddle about almost anything. Nobody else could ever think of a riddle that would stump Pelón. Pelón was the one who would sweep out the church and keep the building in good repair for Padre Chiquito. And when the troubles of the villagers would begin to worry their good priest, and he would grow a bit sad, Pelón could cheer him back up again with his jokes and his stories. Well, it happened one Sunday, just when the people were gathering at the little village church for Mass, that a carriage pulled up and the governor of New Mexico got down out of the carriage. Now, you must understand, in these times, the governor was not elected by the people. He was sent by the King of Spain. Many of those governors were more interested in making themselves rich than in serving the people. This governor was the worst one of that kind. The people were very uncomfortable when they saw the governor walk into their little church and go to the very front and sit down. But then as soon as Padre Chiquito began to speak, a calmness came over them. He preached a beautiful sermon to them. They were so proud of their good priest. When the basket came around, they reached into their pockets and took out every penny they had and put it into the collection. The governor saw them do that. He said to himself, "Oh, look at this. When my tax collectors come around here, these people say, 'We're poor farmers. We don't have money to give you.' But they're giving away their money with both hands to that priest." And the governor decided he was going to get rid of Padre Chiquito. When the Mass had ended and the people had returned to their homes, the governor stood up and walked to Padre Chiquito, shaking his head. He said, "Oh, I don't know, Padre. I'm not sure that you are wise enough to serve the people of this village very well. I think I had better give you a test. I will give you 3 questions, and you may have 3 days to think of the answers. If you can come to my palace in 3 days with the correct answers, you may stay here among the people. But if you fail, I will have you removed. I will put in your place a priest of my choosing." Well, Padre Chiquito didn't have any choice but to agree. And the governor started looking around for a good question. Over on the other side of the road, he saw a dog turn around several times in the grass and then lie down. That gave him the first question. He said, "First, you will have to tell me, ¿cuántas vueltas da un perro antes de acostarse?" Padre Chiquito repeated the question to himself. How many circles does a dog make before it lies down? He thought, how can there be just one answer to the question? It's probably a different number every time the dog lies down. The governor saw the worried look on the priest's face. He smiled to himself because he had thought of his second question. He said, "And then you must tell me, ¿qué tan hondo es el mar?" Padre Chiquito thought, how deep is the sea? I'm a priest. I'm not a man of science. I don't know how deep the ocean is. Now the governor was really smiling because he had thought of a third question. It was an impossible question to answer. Then you must tell me, ¿qué estoy pensando? Padre Chiquito shuddered when he heard that. What am I thinking? Nobody knows what another person is thinking. But the governor turned and walked away, leaving Padre Chiquito there wondering how he could answer those 3 questions in 3 lifetimes, much less in 3 days. But later that morning, Pelon showed up with a broom to sweep out the church, and he saw the worried look on the priest's face. And when he learned the reason, he said, no se le dé cuidado, Padre Chiquito. Don't worry about it, Padre Chiquito. Let me borrow one of your robes. Let me ride your little donkey. In 3 days, I'll go there to the governor's palace. I'll try to answer those questions for you. Padre Chiquito didn't think anyone could answer those questions, but he didn't see any better solution. So 3 days later, Pelon got dressed in the governor's robe, the priest's robe. He pulled the hood over his head. He tied it under his chin. He climbed on the back of the priest's little gray donkey. He went jogging off to the governor's palace. When he got there, he saw that the governor had invited all his wealthy friends to watch him make a fool of the good priest. Pelon walked into the room. He stood in front of that crowd of rich people, and the governor repeated the first question. First, you must tell me cuántas vueltas da un perro antes de acostarse. Pelon said, how many circles does a dog make before it lies down? Oh, that's easy, Your Excellency. Las que le dé la gana. As many as he wants to. And the governor's rich friends all said, ah, that's the answer. That's how many circles a dog makes. Todas las que le dé la gana. As many as he feels like making. The governor thought, oh, this priest is more clever than I thought. But he knew that was the easiest question of all. So he repeated the second question. Well, now tell me, ¿qué tan hondo es el mar? Pelon said, how deep is the ocean? Oh, that is easy too, Your Excellency. Una tirada de una piedra. The governor said, what? One stone's throw? Una tirada de una piedra? You think that's all the deeper the ocean is? But then he realized, oh, that's true. If you throw a rock into the ocean, it's going to go exactly to the bottom, no matter where you are. And the governor's wealthy friends all said, ah, that's another perfect answer. That's how deep the ocean is, no matter where you are. Una tirada de una piedra. The governor thought, oh, this priest is clever. But he had one more question. It was an impossible question to answer. So he said, well, now tell me, ¿qué estoy pensando? Pelon said, what are you thinking, Your Excellency? That is the easiest question of all. You think you're talking to Padre Chiquito. You're not. You're talking to Pelon. And he threw the hood back and showed everyone the bald head. The governor's rich friends all started laughing, and the governor had to swallow his anger and join in the laughter with his friends. And then he invited Pelon to stay there and join them for a meal. And then he sent the good servant riding back home on the donkey with the happy news that Padre Chiquito could stay there and serve the people of that village as long as he lived. And that is exactly what he did too. Thank you. So now you have some new riddles. Don't forget them. ¿Cuántas vueltas da un perro antes de acostarse? As many as he wants to. ¿Qué tan hondo es el mar? How deep is the sea? One stone's throw. Si una vaca se cae al río, ¿cómo la vas a sacar? You don't know that one? If a cow falls into the river, how are you going to get her out? Mojada! She's going to be wet, right? ¿Cómo la vas a sacar? Mojada. How are you going to get the cow out of the river? She's going to be wet. Just like the stories, the riddles were always a way of teaching something, teaching you to look at things in a different way, to look at all sides of the question. Well, oh my goodness. If a storyteller has finished up his stories and he's hoping that maybe this won't be the very last time he ever gets to tell stories to these good people, what should he do? I'll see if I can find someplace else to tell you some stories, maybe next summer. This has been wonderful. Thank you so very much for coming this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for honoring me all of these years by listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Oh.